Look, I'm one of those people who says ideas are so cheap, like you don't need to buy them from a kiosk. It's what you do with them that's important.
That is true. But I'm just greedy. And if there's a good brand out there that Terry's been using, I wouldn't mind trying it.
Hi, I'm Ben McKenzie, and not Elizabeth Flux. Welcome to Pratchett, the monthly Terry Pratchett Book Club podcast. Each month, we discuss one of Terry Pratchett's books or short stories with a special guest. This month, we're reading Designing Terry Pratchett's Discworld, or as I like to call it, How to Get Ahead in Fantasy Illustrating by Trying Really Hard. And our guest is illustrator, designer, and educator, Brendan Barnett. Welcome, Brendan.
Oh, thank you, Ben. And not Elizabeth Flux, but thank you.
I know, it's sad. Look, listeners, I'm sure you're wondering where Liz is. Unfortunately, at the very last minute, Liz was unable to come to our live recording, and she sends her apologies. She read all of your questions and loved them.
Yeah, well, very happy to be here, Ben.
It's weird. In some ways, it's weird that it's taken until episode 88 of this show for us to have you on and talk to you, because I've been working with you longer than I've been making this show.
Yes.
Which is an extraordinarily long time if you think about it.
Yes, we've been doing that educator artist sort of bit together for how long is it? It's close to a decade.
Yeah, about a decade.
Yes.
And occasionally, you know, Terry Pratchett would come up at work and we'd talk about him a little bit, but not very much. And I think that's probably good because this gives us a really good excuse to talk about him now.
We're primed and ready. We've been saving it up for 10 years, Ben. 10 years for the Pratchett chat.
You got so much to let out. So when did you first find Terry Pratchett? How did you get into him?
Oh, well, because of this, I had to sort of cast my mind back. And I realized that, I have a vague memory. And it's almost dreamlike of being on a football field talking to a boy called Daniel, who was in my composite class in grade 6, 7. And instead of playing football, he's showing me pages of some sort of death-keeping bees. Black bees that buzz around in his skull in some sort of graphic magazine-y format, and just telling me all the lore, just lore dumping Discworld at me, and me going, I don't know what this kid's on about, but it sounds pretty cool. And I think it was years later that, as I sort of, maybe it might have been a year later, that I sort of found Maud in a bookstore and bought it. I think I read that in a few days and just sort of devoured that. And just got introduced to that world with its side notes and Terry Pratchett's just amazing voice and humor. And I think from there, then I went back to the start, Colour of Magic and Light Fantastic. And then, I think that was the bulk. That was me as a reader for most of high school, I was just reading Terry Pratchett and then whatever English was assigning us to read. So it'd be George Orwell, then Terry Pratchett, and be Aldous Huxley, then Terry Pratchett. Yeah, so Terry Pratchett was keeping things fun for that time. And I actually reading this book and sort of being reintroduced to his world. I was like, I actually fell away from the books around about the Fifth Element, Monstrous Regiment, and not for any fault of Terry's or the books. I think I picked up Douglas Adams and I got very into Douglas Adams and other things were happening and I haven't returned. So actually there's this whole the Tiffany Aching and the Maurice von Lipwig stuff that I'm not as familiar with. So I actually get to read more Terry Pratchett, which I know is an often sort of said thing on the podcast that you don't. And I was I actually do. And that's so great that I get to read some more.
That is a joy because getting to read one for the first time obviously only ever happens once. But also, I mean, most of them anyway get better the more you read them.
Yeah.
I think I've said this on the podcast before, but I used to reread The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy every year when I was a kid because I was a Douglas Adams fan first and then I found Terry Pratchett. And every year that I would read it when I was a kid in high school, I would get more of the jokes because I had more
Yeah.
context. I had more adult context for what they were about. I think Pratchett's like that too, but it's less because I started them later. It's less that adult context and more broader sort of pop culture and other culture context and history and science and everything else because he was, we've described as a magpie before.
Yeah, collector. Yeah.
It's interesting that, you say he fell off around the Fifth Elephant time because I think that is actually that and the, maybe 5 or so books before it seems to be where a lot of people stopped. And I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's because people who started him as teenagers, that was like just a particular time in all of our lives or what the deal was.
Yeah. I know that I was just looking at the back catalogue, sort of reacquainting myself. I'm like, oh, when was that? And it's early 2000s, which for me was, I was just out of uni for the first time. I went straight from high school to uni. I did animation. And I think I just hit the world really hard. And I was trying to survive as an artist. And sadly, I didn't make enough time for that sort of childhood art that had been like sustaining me so much. I was more like trying to find some opportunity to do some myself and a bunch of other stuff that was maybe less noble, as I sort of just trying to find my feet as an adult and failing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense. I think that's a lot of people's experience is, that's such a hugely transitional time in your life. Particularly if you're moving to another place to study as well, a lot of things get disrupted. And so I think some things you cling to even harder and some things you just sort of let go. It's a weird sort of mixed bag of what you do, I think.
I always felt like I never sort of let go of the Discworld novels. That was always such a big part of my fantasy landscape. Like the map of fantasy authors in my head, like Pratchett lands a really, really big continent. Other than Tolkien, there's probably not many authors that occupy as much space, and I spend a lot of my time thinking about fantasy stuff. But Pratchett, I always felt he was like with me, like when I do like role-playing stuff and when I like do illustration, he undercuts the fantasy and the escapism with this bit of humanism and this reality, and it's like, and this poking fun and satire that sort of makes it just feel a little bit more like, well, we're being clever about this, and we're being like interesting, and we're still playing with interesting ideas in interesting ways. And so I've always meant to walk back in. It's just like you don't know. I was reflecting with a friend the other day. There's like, you don't know when that last time you sort of apparently have all summer to play board games is.
Yeah.
And it happens, and then it's like, and then 10 years go by and you're like, hang on, when did that stop happening? And I always meant to like, oh yeah, I'm definitely coming back to Pratchett. So I'm really happy to do it in this way.
Yeah. And look, when we were thinking about who we can have as a guest to talk about this particular book, you were very top of my mind because I'm a big fan of your illustrations, which you've done for many things. Like you did them for the work where we worked together, for your own work as a designer of role-playing game stuff, mostly adventures. The last novel that we did was Snuff, which really introduces goblins to the Discworld. And I know you haven't read it, so I won't give away any more than that. But anytime I think of goblins, I think about Terry Pratchett and I think about you as well, because you draw these amazing little goblins that I really enjoy.
Yeah, the last adventure was all goblins. And we were having a coffee the other day and you mentioned that goblins made their way into the Discworld. And I was like, what? Why wasn't I told about this? I mean, it's my fault. It's my fault for not paying enough attention. But I'm like, well, Terry Pratchett and goblins together is I've got to have a look at this.
Yeah. I mean, look, to be fair to you, he only really did it right at the end. They're only in the last like 2 or 3 books. So they're easy to miss. But very sad to miss. Like, they're really great.
And I think I'd noticed in those moist books, the goblins peeking out from the book covers. I think that looks like a goblin to me. And, then I'd look at my empty pockets and I'd look at that beautiful hardcover with this now much less like melty and shiny people on it. And I'd be like, oh, I want to find out about that goblin.
Well, you would have found out a bit about them reading this book.
Yeah.
Which when I asked you about this, you told me you're quite a big Paul Kidby fan. So this is like a double whammy for you.
Yeah, well, I think the first Kidby thing I had was a Discworld calendar. Because when you declare a love of something that is as serialized as Discworld, every aunt and family member every Christmas is like, that's all you get, which is probably part of why I just read Terry Pratchett for 7 years. But yeah, I had a little sort of desktop calendar of Kidby illustrations. And I think I've heard other people like George Rex talk about this as well on your podcast, that really well evoked characters from the books. Like all of a sudden you see Granny Weatherwax and you're like, because I went back looking at this to the Weird Sisters cover. And I believe from my memory, I am casting my mind back, that's Granny Weatherwax in the stocks. And it's definitely Granny Weatherwax beside-esque on the Equal Rights cover. And she's got that sort of Punch and Judy, hooked crescent moon face and warts. And I didn't think much of it at the time. But then you see this sort of stern, kind of severely kind of pinned down woman staring out of you from the Kidby calendar that I had. They were like his tonal sketches. They were like his tonal, like his finished draft drawings. And there's Carrot as well. And then you're like, oh, this is actually I can see the character behind the eyes in those drawings.
Yeah. Well, let's not get too ahead of ourselves, because that is the book we're here to discuss. Designing Terry Pratchett's Discworld. We'll probably just call it Designing Discworld for short, but it does seem to be that all new Discworld things must say Terry Pratchett's Discworld. And look, fair play, it is Terry Pratchett's Discworld. I don't think there's anybody who doesn't know that. But, that's what they've gone for. So that's all right. But anyway, this is Designing Terry Pratchett's Discworld. And before we get into it, let's begin as we traditionally do on the podcast by reading the blurb. It's still magic, even if you know how it's done, said Terry Pratchett. Designing Terry Pratchett's Discworld takes readers behind the scenes of the amazing partnership between Sir Terry Pratchett and artist Paul Kidby. It shows how the Discworld was brought to visual life, from the earliest sketches to the final magnificent masterpieces, and how Terry and Paul absorbed influences from art and pop culture, fusing them into the Discworld landscape. Whilst Terry was the undisputed creative fountainhead, for 3 decades Paul has been the artistic force, taking the people, places, and pieces of man-eating luggage from Terry's ever-fertile imagination right into our world. Designing Terry Pratchett's Discworld also outlines the images that we never got to see, the early covers of the great unwritten novels, taken from the world before their time. This is a unique insight into one of the great literary partnerships, packed full of hitherto unseen art and the real stories behind it. And it is, look, you probably guess, listener, if you haven't seen the book, it's not a novel. It's not a paperback. This is a fully illustrated square hardcover. It's similar in format to Tiffany Atkins' Guide to Being a Witch, which I didn't say this at the start. We were originally going to try and cover them both at the same time, but I'm glad we decided not to, because this book's got plenty going on all by itself. It's a beautiful piece of work. This is the sort of thing that you put on. It's so much like coffee table books, I think, have evolved in my lifetime. They used to be quite slim. Like, they'd be big and heavy, but they didn't have that many pages. Like, if they had, 80 pages, you were lucky. And they'd just have pictures, and you'd look through them, and you'd get through them in like one sitting over an hour. And they weren't designed to be looked through. They often didn't have that much text. There were a lot of big full-page illustrations. Whereas now I feel like they're often more like this, where there's a lot of content, they're quite thick, and there's stuff to read. There's a lot more context in them.
It's so dense. There's so much to unpack, because then, you're cross-referencing to the pictures as well, and you're sort of bouncing between the two, hovering between them, going, hang on, where is that? And I've flipped through this a lot. You don't read it cover to cover. You go back and forth. Yeah.
It's a gorgeous book. And of course, it's full of Paul Kidby illustrations. Of course, as it would have to be in order to fulfill its function.
Yeah, if there were no Kidby illustrations, we take it back.
That'd be weird, wouldn't it? It'd be really weird. Yeah. It's just text. What? I didn't come here to read Paul Kidby's writing.
Just imagine it.
Yeah, just imagine what they look like. Unfortunately, listener, that's what you have to do if you haven't seen it. I apologize. But look, I think one of the great joys of this is that a lot of it is pieces of art that we have seen before, but there's a lot of new art. A lot of that is sort of work in development, but there's also quite a few pieces, and this really surprised me, that he's gone back and revisited something he'd already drawn. And a lot of that, I think, had happened before this book. I don't know that he revisited a lot of stuff specifically for this, but he'd sort of gone back and gone, oh, what if I could do another version of that for this calendar instead of just using the same one that I already did? Like, what if I want to improve that? which I think is fascinating. But look, we will go through it roughly in order. We're not going to talk about every single image. We're not going to talk about every single point in the book. Like, it is 150 pages. Like I said, so there's a lot going on in here. But we will talk about some of the bits, and we'll start by talking about the foreword, which is written by actor Colin Morgan, who you probably know, listener, as Merlin from the BBC TV show of the same name, playing a young Merlin. Very silly but tremendously fun TV show. But you might also know him as the narrator of the new Penguin audiobook versions of the Wizards books from the Discworld. It's always a delight when you find out like some famous person is just a big nerd like you, isn't it?
Yeah, and happens to be in a show where they're waving wands and swords around. Who would have thought that they're a fantasy nerd?
Yeah. I think it just warms your heart to know. I know that if I did that job, I would be like jumping out of bed every day. Like, even though I know, working on a TV set is not fun all of the time. Like, it's hard work and it's sometimes, and then it's boring at other times. And it's a long day usually. I know that it's a job and you do work hard, but I also know that if that was my job, I'd be like, yes, let's make the most of this. This is what I live for. It's nonsense. Let's go. And when you find out an actor is just a big nerd and super into it, not just actors, but anybody, you're like, yes, one of us got in.
Yeah, and that they get to sort of celebrate it in that way and get to sort of, it's such a childhood fantasy thing, isn't it? You grow up in one set of movies or genre pieces and you think, you just want to don the hood yourself or the cloak or the sword or the mail and do your own thou shalt not pass, and get into it.
Yeah. And as it turns out, Colin Morgan is not just a fantasy nerd. He's really into Terry Pratchett. And so he was very excited to do the audiobook, and he's very excited to be visual inspiration for not one, but two Paul Kidby illustrations, including a goblin.
Yes.
Which I thought was great.
I really like the God of Hangovers there, the Caravaggio reference. It's a really strong likeness. The goblin, I think, is sort of, I was like, it's lucky that he's flattered by those vicious sharp teeth, and that looks like maybe a different sort of alter ego.
Yeah, I mean, it is a cool goblin, but it's not like a suave, handsome goblin.
No. No, I mean, if I opened my cupboard and saw it in there, I think I'd be alarmed.
Yeah, and look, rightly so. We go from the forward into sort of a very short preface by Paul Kidby, which introduces the fact that this book does have footnotes, but kind of delightfully, the footnotes are drawn in. So they're a little bit like the notes pinned into Tiffany Aiking's Guide to Being a Witch, which are written in the handwriting of the witches who are annotating her manuscript. I won't go into that in too much detail. We have talked about it a bit on the podcast before. But here, the text is sort of typeset in two columns, as is pretty normal for this sort of book. But then the asterisk for the footnote is hand-drawn, and the writing is drawn by Paul Kidby as well.
You've got that full cast of characters on the left there as well, the sort of the portraits of so many of the people he's given flesh to.
That's just that's a massive painting. I don't know if you've ever seen the full one. It's usually called the Discworld Massive because it's so big, and also it's all of the Discworld characters, but it's huge. It's huge. It's so good, though.
I've got to make a note for myself because later on he talks about not having much art up in his studio, but I do think I spot the Massive on the shelf. Maybe he needs that for a reference because he's got so many characters to recreate.
Yeah.
He's like, hang on, how did I do Rid Cully again? And has to go and do a sort of quick check. And you've also got his depiction of his two ridiculously sharpened pencils. They're sharpened he chisels them so that he's got more control, he says, but they're like a medieval weapon. They're like a lance.
Yeah.
They're so sharpened.
They look dangerous. They don't, I mean, they also look like they'd snap at the tiniest. I guess he must have a very light touch when doing the pencil work.
I think so. I mean, just looking at his art, you can tell that. But if I had these in my grubby mitts, they would last seconds, mere seconds. Then I'd be sort of scratching away with the remnants.
To get back to your other point, I think you'd have to have some sort of reference, right? He must have like a reference image that he's happy with, or the last image that he drew of any particular character stored away somewhere, because you'd remember the big ones that you've drawn lots of pictures of, like Rid Cully. I'm sure he doesn't really need to look up Rid Cully, but when it's like the third golem that no one can remember the name of that golem because they appear in like two scenes in one novel, or, the eighth troll. He's like, wait, is that the one that I made look like it was this kind of rock, or is it the one that I made look like that? Surely you'd need some sort of reference for that, right?
Yeah, I would think so, just for consistency, because even if Terry didn't notice, which I'm sure he would, and if he didn't know, there would be someone, there's such a big fandom out there that someone would know, and they'd let him know that he'd sort of, that he'd been inconsistent.
Yeah.
And yeah, and like later on we get into, like, you talked about him redoing work, like, and returning to work. I kind of love this idea that he goes looking for the characters still. He mentions sort of Angua at one point and Carrot. He talks about different iterations of Vimes, and that he's sort of still sort of carving away at the rock, as it were. It's like they're still in there somewhere. And, he'll put in a different celebrity. He'll age them up or down, and he'll just. I like that. So even if he is using a reference, it's sort of still, they're still changing. They're still sort of evolving as they're being fleshed out.
Yeah, which just makes them feel more alive, I think. Because they're always recognizably them, but they do change over time. And some of that is that they have aged in the books, but also some of that is just Paul Kidby going, no, I think this is better. I think this is more who this character is. We'll get into his journey into becoming an artist in a moment, but I think one thing that really comes through loud and clear in this book is how much he cares, how much he really puts thought and effort into everything that he draws. There's no Discworld character that he's drawn that's just like, oh, I guess they kind of look like this, whatever. I don't care. He's always really, and I related to that. I mean, and these days I teach people about the creative process. I teach students at tertiary level about the creative process and about how we think and work as artists, how we learn to get deeper into that. And he's such an amazing example of someone who's gone on that journey, and it's like, no, the art is the thing, everything. You pour yourself into it.
Yeah, he's such loving dedication in how he goes about it. We mentioned at the start that, I am a fan of Paul Kidby's work. As someone that aspires to be a good illustrator and a good artist, you look around for benchmarks. And, obviously it came to my attention because I was aware of Terry Pratchett's work. But seeing those faces stare at those covers went around about that Night Watch transition, like, that's a real benchmark that I always looked to. I was like, these drawings are expressive. They have so much personality. They have a lot of caricature to them. But there is that sort of almost that painterly oil painting sort of realism to them as well. Yeah, and the craftsmanship to create that effect and walk that line of kind of humorous and exaggerated but sort of grounded. Yeah, it takes a lot of craft, I think, to be able to pull that off.
Yeah, he does walk that line. There's a couple of times in the book where he says, what I do isn't really caricature. And I think that's true. Like, there's a couple of times where he has deliberately, gone over into that style. But for the most part, what he's drawing, if you saw an actual real human being who looked like that, you'd be like, that's a bit unusual. But they feel real. They feel like a real person, even though the features are exaggerated in various ways.
They look real for the secondhand set of dimensions. They look
exactly.
real in the context of Discworld real. Like, you're like, yep, they're absolutely walking around, and yeah.
This next chapter, which is called Journey into Discworld, is really a very short account of his life leading up to Terry Pratchett. And it sort of talks about his childhood where he's fascinated with dinosaurs, and he drew dinosaurs and dogs, and then he started art lessons and was inspired by the work of people like Terry Gilliam, and really got a very classical illustrating education. When you were studying animation, did you start with similar kinds of fundamentals that they're talking about here, or was your direction for learning quite different?
I think it was different. We were just put in a room with light boxes and told to draw all day, which is kind of what we did. And we just drew all day. And in animation, at least initially, you're valuing each drawing a little, that's not the right way to say it, but the focus is on the flow of motion from one drawing to another. So what you're trying to do is get the illusion of motion working, often in a very scribbly kind of way. And you have less time to sort of pin down the details and do this really like beautiful renderings that he's doing. Whereas, I was sort of reading some of this. Why didn't anyone teach me that when I was younger? I had to wait for YouTube to be invented to find out about that. So I guess not all bachelor's degrees are created equal.
Well, the focus is quite different.
Yes.
For an animator, as you say.
But it's also in art or any craft, there's a bit of luck to like finding the right teachers. I think when you really want to learn something, you'll find a way. Particularly these days, there are ways to find out how to learn something. But Kathleen Ockenden, his private tutor, she's sort of telling him to sort of draw from life, do gesture sketching. I think that is one thing that, I was lucky when I was still in high school that my art teacher sort of tapped me on the shoulder and sent me to after school life drawing classes, And so once everyone got over the sort of adolescent titters and all that sort of stuff of like, there's a nude person, it was just really, you just settled into this, like, the drawing is observing and then letting your hand record what your eye observes with obviously some interpretation happening. And I think that's where I sort of first started to get that sense of, it's just really satisfying when you nail a shadow on something or actually realize that the shoulder joins into the back that way and you can see it under the skin. Something that's much better demonstrated in Kidby's work with his level of professionalism than it is in mine. But it's just, so I guess there is that sort of similarity that observation is the foundation of this sort of stuff. And we were talking about how his characters look realistic and they're believable and grounded, and it's because he's drawn from life. Yeah. And I think it's really kind of, I don't know, prescient, but it's really well observed of his teacher to say, like, you can't just draw fantasy monsters and fantasy subject matter out of thin air. You've got to sort of base it in the real. He talks later on about he's always finding someone to base each character and portrait on, because that's what gives them that feeling of being a real person, because they are a real person.
Yeah. I found that really interesting too, because I knew obviously that quite a few of them were. And I mean, we talked to Rhiannon Pratchett and Gabrielle Kent, who wrote Tiffany Aiking's Guide, and he did so many new illustrations for them. I mean, this is the other thing, is he clearly loves drawing these characters, because they talked in many interviews. I think they might have even mentioned it in the one that they did with us, that, he kept saying, oh, I want to draw this and I want to draw this. And they were like, stop it. We can't add more pages. It was clear some of them were based on, as you said earlier, like celebrities or movie stars or actors. But this book made it clear that even more of them than I knew. It's interesting because one of the things this chapter has is bits where he talks about things and there's no context for them, and they're very UK specific things that don't quite make sense to other people, because we're getting now from his early days of learning to draw into his professional career, where he did a lot of painting for one of his big jobs was for Future Publishing, which was a big publishing house who did glossy magazines, mostly about entertainment. So they did a lot of video game magazines in particular he worked on. I used to read some of their magazines, the ones that made it over here, mostly PC format. So I don't know if he ever did a cover for that magazine, but if he did, I would have seen it back in the 90s.
I'm certain I've seen some of these covers and some of this artwork,
Yeah, like the Velociraptor, that's like a full-page reproduction. I'm sure I've seen that illustration in my life before, because I'm old. I was around when the film
I was thinking
out.
The Mortal Kombat and the Earthworm Jim. I'm like, definitely.
Yeah, that Earthworm Jim looks familiar.
Electronics Boutique or something.
Yeah. I mean, I find a lot of artists that I really admire are really good at drawing things in many different styles. And he clearly has got that. Not all of these drawings that you see in here, all these paintings, I should say, look the same, right? No. You wouldn't necessarily immediately know that they were his work by looking at what they look like. And that Earthworm Jim, it looks like Earthworm Jim.
Yeah. And I guess when you're drawing like an IP like that, like I guess he's drawing Discworld, but like Earthworm Jim is an animated character. He's like visually identified character. So when you're doing that, you kind of have to reproduce someone's art if you're not the original artist.
Yeah.
You're kind of in some ways being hired to recreate it.
Yeah, but in the size and in the pose and in the shape that we need it. Yeah.
Yeah. I've sort of danced in and out of illustration in my life and as career and ways of making money, but it's early career artists. The impression I get is that you take the jobs you get. And and you better be flexible, because you've been given a brief and you got to work to that brief. And in many cases, the brief is going to be like this. This is my favorite thing, or this is the thing that I want to reproduce, but I don't want to pay that artist who's much more established and is going to require a lot more.
But yeah, I was just struck by it because there's a lot of, he's got that painting style and he's got like really cartoony stuff. Like one of the things I was talking about, this section has lack of context for those of us who are not from the UK, like the drink Umbongo. I was like, what is this? And it's just a boxed fruit drink. It's like juice boxes that we have here or something like that.
Oh.
But a weird 1980s brand.
I'm seeing the straw now. I'm seeing the straw.
Yeah.
I thought it was like Nerds or something. I briefly saw. Shows how visually observant I am. I hadn't seen the straw in the top, and you're like, oh, of course it's a drink.
It's a great illustration, though, as much as I'm iffy about the name of the product. But yeah, these covers are really interesting because obviously there's a lot of fantasy and sci-fi because he's doing all this video game stuff. So there's spaceships and monsters and a lot of recognizable stuff, like a lizard man with a football who's clearly like from Blood Bowl or something, stuff like that. And then the amazing cover of Games Master from whatever year that is.
Yeah.
That is a Grim Reaper dressed as Santa Claus, but it's not Death of the Discworld. It's just a coincidental thing.
And it's sort of an alternate cover for Hogfather. Yeah,
it's so weird. We didn't say this explicitly. The really amazing thing about that Grim Reaper in a Santa outfit cover is that it came out the year before Terry wrote Hogfather. Incredible. I don't know if it's because in Australia we just get the UK edition and that they would have had to put something different in or given it a bit more context for the American edition. I assume there's an American edition, but there's never an Australian edition of these books. So they don't explain what Umbongo is and they don't explain what Littlewoods is when he talks about getting a picture out of the Littlewoods catalogue, which is just, it was one of those big catalogue stores that weirdly, I looked it up, weirdly they were originally a football betting company and then they went into retail. They became like one of the biggest companies in Europe at one point. And then the internet came and destroyed the catalog retail business. And so all of their stores are pretty much gone now, as far as I can tell. But, it's that sort of, there were some fashion models and I used them for drawing this cover of a video game about Robin Hood. I was looking at that trying to figure out what game it was. I don't think I've played it. I don't know it.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's got a real, it feels to me like one of those sort of RPG sort of off-brand D&D kind of things, but for for PC.
I think it probably was. But look, this section, as we get towards the end of this chapter about his history leading up to Discworld, kind of goes into the point where this is why I made the joke at the start about, he's trying really hard. He read The Color of Magic. Someone gave it to him and he's like, this is amazing. I want to draw for this guy. I want to draw these characters. And so he did it. He drew them and he sent them. He sent them to Terry. He sent them to Terry once. He sent them to his publisher and he thought, I've got one more chance at this. And he went to a convention and handed him an envelope of drawings and he didn't hear anything back. And he's like, okay, well, I've shot my shot. I've done it 3 times. And the interesting thing to me was I was reading this and I was remembering the biography. I've read the official biography where there's a short account of this from the Terry Pratchett perspective. And the only thing that it mentions is him giving him the envelope at the convention. Like it's like the previous 2 times he tried to get the gig never happened.
Didn't make it on the radar. But I will say that the first time, from my reading of this, he sent him sort of generic, like Lord of the Rings fantasy illustrations.
That's right.
So he had orcs and goblins and wizards and skeletons. And he thought, if I want to get Terry Pratchett's attention, I should draw his characters. Yeah, so the second time he's sending off a folio of his characters and
that's right.
Right up to that. And it's sort of interesting because you get the sense of the mounting kind of popularity of the novels because he talks about showing up and, it's not time to sort of lean on the desk and have a long chat with Terry. It's like he's got to get in this long line and
there's hundreds of people here.
Yeah.
I think that was just at a signing as well. I don't think it was at a convention. Or maybe it was a convention, but it wasn't a Discworld convention because it would have been before the first Discworld convention, I think. There's a bit later on when he talks about Josh Kirby, who I was glad came up because he doesn't come up in the blurb at all, but that's all right. Josh Kirby's got his own books. But he talks about the fact that, when they hung out at a convention and looking around at all of these people who were turning up to see Terry Pratchett, they're like, wow, he's really way more popular than we thought. I'm like, how did you, I guess, but this was, this is before the internet was as much of a thing in people's lives. It was that sort of weird, it was that weird time where, there was a monoculture, but it was quite geographical in that, everyone in the UK had the same however many channels of television and the same newspapers and the same publishers. And, we had them in Australia, you had them in the US, you had them in any country. But before the internet kind of took that a bit more global where everybody, certainly everyone speaking the same language at least was looking at and reading and hearing about a lot of the same stuff. It was kind of the early days of that. And then now, you know, we've kind of gone through that, and now we've become hyper fragmented in our culture because of the way that algorithms are splitting everybody up into their own sort of little worlds. But that's not what we're here to talk about.
Well,
but it was
I do think it's
sort
interesting that as a journeyman artist, he's having to use a bit of shoe leather and postage stamps.
Yeah.
To try and get the attention of an author who he wants to work for, and that's a thing that he could do. Like, it is really interesting. I think this whole chapter was a sort of, like, this book really reminded me how much I love the worlds of Terry Pratchett and the characters, but also just seeing those old PC magazines and video game titles and book signings and sending stuff off by mail. There's this nostalgic's maybe too strong a word, but just this blast from the past recollection of, like, oh yeah, that's how it did used to be like that, you know?
Yeah. There's bits in here too. He doesn't go into it as much in this book, but in the biography, they talk about the story of making The Last Hero, the big illustrated book. And there's stuff in here from it, but they talk a bit more about the process where they were using like some ancient early version of Photoshop to composite it. But that meant that the final files they created were uneditable. And that's all they had for a long time. So they couldn't really relay out the book. They had to just reproduce it exactly as it was originally laid out. And also, he doesn't work in digital. As far as I can tell, he never works in digital. Everything is paint.
He's getting card and board and doing full acrylics and oil paintings.
So he'd done these massive paintings for the book, and they had to put them in a van and take them to somewhere where they had a scanner big enough to scan them because they were so big. Like, stuff like that you're like, you wouldn't, like, most people, if they were illustrating a book now, would probably not do it with paint, right? They'd be working digitally.
It's got me wondering. I'm like, maybe I should pick up some acrylics because, it's just like, he's getting good results with a lot of sweat.
But it looks amazing. But it all paid off. And his first work with Terry Pratchett was a thing that the publishers agreed to do. Well, the first thing was he drew a picture of the librarian, and he wanted to do a limited edition print. And I love that he doesn't talk a lot about Josh Kirby, but the first thing he says about his art is he's like, he feels, and I think we've kind of felt the same on the podcast as well when we've talked about Kirby's work, is that he captures the tone well. Yep. Like, it feels a bit high energy, a bit weird and a bit funny. Like, it feels funny, right? But the characters don't necessarily look anything like you were saying earlier. His Granny Weatherwax does not look anything like the description of her in the book. And so Kidby's come in and gone, oh, that's not how I imagine these characters looking, actually. I reckon I could draw a really good one. That's ambition. I like that.
Yeah, and as a reader of the work as well, and it's, one of my favorite bits was him talking about Kirby and that transition. I actually really liked just that double-page spread of Nightwatch because that was his first cover for a book in the series. That's when he talks about being at that convention with Kirby, and he's pretty respectful of Kirby in how he talks about him. There's a sort of professional respect. But he makes the point that Kirby is a really well-established artist that was working with a new author. And so Terry had much less control over how Kirby did things, and that he was an up-and-coming artist working with an established, now very popular author. And so Terry had a lot of editorial control and input into what he did. Yeah. And plus, just the idea of the universe of Discworld and how it's held in the minds of fans is more of an established known quantity. Because if you were like an illustrator, and I don't know how much Kirby read the novels. I absolutely don't know because I'm not reading a book about Kirby, how absorbed he was in the lore of Discworld and the characters. But if you were him and you got this sort of pitch of Terry Pratchett's Discworld, like, how would you, do you know what I mean? How would you go about, because they are very novel novels. They are very unique in the world of fantasy. Like, he's carving out a new space, like a new genre, and trying to match that to a visual style would have been a huge challenge. And as you say, you did well. You've got this beautiful, like, lava lamp of fantasy action happening on each cover. And personally, like, I know you talk about the sort of art comes up from time to time, and I quite like Kirby. I definitely have similar qualms to some of it. I was actually just looking at the old covers, and I'm like, Moving Pictures is one book in the early bit that I've never read. And I think partly it was like, as a young teenager, there was no way I was bringing that home or asking my aunt to buy it for me.
Yeah, sure.
Like,
Yeah, that makes sense.
But yeah, I really like how Kidby talks about this transition. And what I like is he said that far from it being a usurping, it was that Kirby had passed away. He wasn't trying to take this person's bread and butter. And I found it interesting too, just on that page that's talking about revolution with Nightwatch, and that he brings in this theme of usurping. I don't know if that was intentional.
Yeah. Well, I think the interesting thing for me was he's talking about the fan reaction, and that's what they were saying. And there's a tremendous love for those old Josh Kirby covers amongst older Discworld fans, or fans who got into it early, at least. It doesn't seem to be there as much with newer readers. I think people who come to them now when there's all these different covers, like the cover is not as iconically part of the book for them. And so they don't have that nostalgia, and they don't have that very strong correlation of the two. Whereas, when I started reading Pratchett books, they all had Josh Kirby covers. Like when I started, it was before any of the covers came out that were by other artists. Because the other thing is that Nightwatch wasn't the first of his novels that had a cover that wasn't by Josh Kirby. His children's books before that were always done by other artists. It wasn't until there were later editions of them that Paul Kidby did new art for them. And even then, he didn't do all of them. Like, I don't think he's ever done any of the non-Discworld stuff, for example. And there's certainly no non-Discworld Terry Pratchett art in this book, which I found really interesting. Whereas, Josh Kirby did do covers for all of the children's books, or a lot of them, not all of them. And then there were other artists who did some of them as well. I really made a mess of describing who else did covers for Terry's books, and it would be a very long footnote if I listed them all to make amends. So here's a short version, just talking about British first editions. Aside from Discworld stuff, Josh Kirby did Truckers, Diggers and Wings, and Paul Kidby did Dodger. The first cover for The Amazing Maurice and His Educated Rodents was by David Wyatt, not either of the two regular artists. Nation was by Johnny Duddle, who also did the interior art. Good Omens was designed by Chris Moore, though you're probably thinking of the paperback painting by Graham Ward. And the Johnny Maxwell books were all over the place. See the episode notes for more details. It was interesting to see, who had the say in who was going to do the covers and what did the fans think of it. And it felt like a good reminder that, people often say the internet's made fans jerks. And you're like, well, fans have always been kind of jerks. Like, they didn't need social media.
Fierce, at any rate.
We had news groups, which were kind of similar, but people were always like, you're changing something. I don't like it. A small number of them anyway.
I guess the degree to which you can be sealed off from it is the thing that's changed, yeah.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. But look, we are into this section of the book now, which is kind of the main bulk of it, which is a whole bunch of chapters which kind of divide the Discworld up into sort of thematic bits. Paul goes through and shows some of his iconic bits of artwork and talks about the process of making them and the characters that are behind them. And he starts off talking about the disc itself. Although one of my favorite illustrations in the book, not one I've seen before, and I don't know if it appears anywhere else. I'm not sure exactly where it's from because it's not all of the bits of art. The one thing that I wish this book had more would be more notes telling you where the art has previously appeared and which bits are new, because a lot of it I was like, I haven't seen that before. Is that from somewhere else and I've missed it, or is it new to this book? And I didn't know the answer for a lot of them. But one of them, there's this little bit in the corner on page 26, which is the ideas booth. I really like it. And it's kind of, I think it's new to this book because it's when he's talking about Terry's little joke that there was a kiosk around the back of Basingstoke train station, which is where he got good ideas from. So I think he's probably drawn for this book, but I love that illustration.
I'm ready to go find that booth because, I'd love it. I've been walking around Flinders Lane and De Grey, so it's got to be somewhere. There's got to be one in Melbourne, a franchise.
Yeah. Look, I'm one of those people who says ideas are so cheap. Like, you don't need to buy them from a kiosk. It's what you do with them that's important.
That is true. But I'm just greedy. And if there's a good brand out there that Terry's been using, I wouldn't mind trying it.
Imagine that. Imagine if there was a little kiosk and you could go there and they'd have a little sign up saying, as sold to Terry Pratchett. You'd be like, I'll have some of those, please.
It's beginning to feel quite illicit, isn't it? It's beginning to feel like it's like a kind of a transcendental experience that you're going looking for.
Yeah. But look, he doesn't have this level of process for all of them, but he does have here in this starting part photographs of his process working on one of his early pictures of Great Achuan swimming through space. I do like his version of Achuan.
I actually really loved getting that little triptych down the bottom because you've got the umber, raw umber acrylic underpainting, as he's titled it, and then he puts in the black base color around it for the space, and sort of, I guess it finds the edge of the picture and sort of really like spotlights. You know, it's kind of reverse spotlighting where you bring in, he talks about this later in Tenebrism, he's bringing in the sort of the black to create this dramatic lighting. And, you know, kind of going to what I was saying earlier about like Kidby being this benchmark for like, wow, that's some amazing technical skill that this artist is using, is sort of, I appreciate the process drawings. I'm like, so that's how you do that. And that's how you're getting those sort of results. So it's like watching a good chef cooking. You're like, okay, like taking it apart. I've been bowerbirding through this whole process in this book going, they're definitely going to try that, definitely going to try this. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, and I think any book like this where it's not just showing you the art, it's showing you the process is so fascinating. If you are an artist of any sort, you don't have to be an illustrator to appreciate this. I think it's also fascinating if you're not. And I think the problem that we have is, you know, everyone who works on this podcast is an artist of one description or another. And so we kind of get it. Listener, I would love to know, if you don't consider yourself an artist, you're not deep in any kind of artistic, creative field. If you've read this book, I would love to know how you found the process stuff in here about how the art is created. Like, did it feel like a peek behind the curtain at some sort of magical thing that you were really excited to see? Or did it feel a bit like, I want to know that? Like, I just want to see the cool pictures. I'd be really interested to hear from you and know what you thought about it.
Because a big part of your and my connection over the last few years has been working with young people, you know, and trying to include them in artistic and writing processes and sort of demystify them and also share the joy of a process. There's a thing on process later on that that maybe is like less joyful but still really valuable. He has a few really interesting things to say about process, and even if he is specifically talking about illustration and painting, I think it can be extrapolated to sort of any artistic process, as is so often the case.
Yeah, I agree. One of the other things I really love about this book is, I said before, like the ones that he's revisited to do again, but also the fact that he doesn't just do that in one direction. Like, he also thinks about, what if this character, what were they like when they were young? It's like a few in the next chapter, which is about the wizards. First of all, there's an amazing illustration of Rincewind and Two Flower on the back of the dragon, Nine Reads. Again, I don't know where that's from. I don't know if it's new for this book, but it's amazing. And all of the chapter sort of splash pages are this kind of 2-page spread where the left part is just pencil drawing and then the right-hand side of it is painted in color. And it's just such a gorgeous effect. I don't know if he's done the whole painting and he's sort of deliberately done it half and half and taken a photo, or if he's taken a photo of the pencil drawing and the final thing and they've digitally rendered them together. I would love to know the answer to that, but that sort of detail is not in the book, so I don't know the answer.
He does say that he works from left to right when he's doing shading. I don't know if that also applies to color, and I notice that Two Flower and Rincewind on the dragon are colored on the left, and no, wait, I've got my left and my right mixed up. I'm going to have to check in the book later on which way he goes, but he goes in a particular direction.
Right.
You know, I might know illustrating, but I don't know which is my left and which is my right. So,
well, you don't need to. You just pick up the pen or whatever it is in the right hand, don't you? Or the correct hand, I mean, not the right hand necessarily. Oh God, we're getting into a whole mess here.
Well, there was a bit where he was talking about working with his hand. I'm left-handed, so it's sort of when writing, I would smudge stuff all the time, and I smudge my drawings all the time as well but that's just because I'm messy, because there's no requirement to go from left to right when you're drawing. You can do it any way you want. I'm just a messy person.
Yes. Yeah. But yeah, look, I was talking before about the younger versions of characters. There's this younger version of Rincewind who appears in this wizard chapter quite early on, which I kind of love. He looks so quite how I imagine him, although with less beard. I always imagined him having a beard, and he always draws in with a very scraggly beard as a sort of an adult or an older adult. I guess he's an adult even when he's younger.
Yeah, it is great. Rincewind is one of those characters, much like Granny, that is one of the best realized characters of all of them, because the Kirby ones, I remember, he's wizened. He looks like a Gandalf-esque, kind of character. He looks like an old wizard. But when you read the books, you realize that Rincewind's doing track and field every day of his life. He's a very live young person from necessity. Yeah.
That was one of the ones where you see the thought process that goes into his character design, where he's going, well, he's always running, so he's going to have to be quite wiry because he's not strong, but he's fast. Yes. So he's not going to be a big beefy guy, but he's got to be mobile, so he's going to be skinny. And I think that also fits with his personality and just the sort of level of thought that's gone into how do I visually represent the personality of a character who previously only appeared in prose, like it's a wonderful insight into that process, which I love. And there's very rare, there's not many of these. In fact, this might be the only one. I don't think I saw any others, but there's this one Terry Pratchett drawing in the book. Pratchett did a drawing of what he thinks Rincewind looks like, which he showed to Paul later on. And Paul's like, oh yeah, that is kind of how I draw him as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like a cute, like a Peanut-style cartoon version of it, but it is recognisably Rincewind.
Yeah. But there's a lot of good stuff about the wizards and the luggage. Just little tidbits. I think this is one of the things that fans will get the most out of this book is there's all these gorgeous illustrations, of course, these characters, but then there's the little tidbits about the decisions that Paul has made to make these characters work. And one of them being like the luggage is famously always described as having hundreds of dear little legs. And they are described in a couple of places as being like little human legs. But he says, hundreds is too many. Like it's somehow more menacing if it's got like 20 or however many he draws it with.
If it's more of a centipede and less of a millipede.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting that he does draw like right and left feet. Like if you look at the picture on page 43, which is quite jolly, like it's the luggage with the teeth. Like he always talks about how he likes drawing it with the teeth, so you get this feel and making it look slightly smiley, like it's enjoying its life of mayhem. But then, the feet are right and left feet. They're not some sort of weird amalgam of
split at the middle. I hadn't noticed that, Ben. That's pretty cool.
Because he always talks about how because the lid is its mouth, that means like the front is the longer side, not the short, which you might otherwise think like if it was an animal you'd think the short side would be the front, but no, it's the wider side. But just little stuff like that you're like, yeah, that's cool. And there's not many times where he says I deliberately made a choice that disagrees with the text, but when he does, he knows exactly why he's doing it.
Well, because he is so observant and so studied, and he goes looking for evidence for everything he puts in the drawing.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I get the sense that that's supporting him as part of his process to create the drawing is, creativity thrives on constraints, and the constraints he has are the facts as given and the descriptions, the slender description that Terry might give, because he sort of says that Terry gives like very short, he doesn't spend a lot of time on physical attributes, but every detail he has is very precious and he uses it to sort of triangulate a character. And it's almost detective-like the way he does it.
Yeah.
There's a picture of Ridcully later on in the book that just really illustrates that really well, like right down to his hat, his accessories. Yeah, I have a lot of respect for that level of paying attention when you're sort of an artist contracted to give someone else's imagination life, not just your own. And that, it's very respectful to do that much homework and pay that much attention.
Yeah, and it's another form of grounding, in the same way that he makes the musculature and the proportions seem either realistic or exaggerated for very specific reasons. He's doing that with everything else as well, which is, really great. I'm looking at the Tower of Art. And when we were looking at the diaries, there's one of the later drawings of the Tower of Art from one of the diaries. And it looks like this sort of weirdly organically grown spire of rock, which doesn't quite match the description in the book, but the description in the book is pretty slim, but also describes the tower as being quite slim, not in as many words, but in terms of how it functions in the narrative. The fact that it's got a spiral staircase, which from the way it's written seems to take up the entire inside of the tower. Like there's nothing in it except this staircase going up to the top. Whereas his versions have got this kind of amazing twisted organic feel to them as it goes up into the sky. And his most recent version's got all these archways and stuff on it. It's an interesting thing because the description is very slim in the book. But for some reason, when I saw one of the versions of this, I was like, but that's not what it looks like. And then I've looked at it again and like, but now I think it's changing my mind about what it looks like.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's convinced me.
I mean, you look at, as you say, if it's just a staircase inside, this is like squashed and stretched up, like Y function sort of stretched up, minus Tirith. It's a citadel. It's got so many crenellations, and I actually look at the top section particularly, and the Dungeons and Dragons nerd in me, it feels very Ravenloft to me, like the art of the Ravenloft modules and pictures of it. And I think there's a map floating around, I can't remember the artist, of a cross-section of Ravenloft, and it has that exaggerated verticality as well. This is something that you could... I looked at this one on that page and sort of thought, you could wander around in there. You could set a whole book inside that Tower of Art. There's a lot of rooms and doors to open inside that Tower of Art.
Yeah. Whereas it just shows up as a prop in about 3 books for 1 or 2 scenes.
Yeah, it's in the Color of Magic, right? That's there's a sort of a crescendo at the...
No, it's in the Light Fantastic, the second.
Yes.
And it's in Sorcery, and it's in Moving Pictures, and I think there's one other one. It's mentioned in other ones, but those are the only ones where it shows up significantly, I think.
Yeah, because I was 13 or 14 when I sort of spent some time in the Tower of Art, and it's been quite some time since I've been up there.
Well, also you went to animation school, right? That's kind of like a Tower of Art.
Yeah. Or a pit of art.
A pit of art.
It actually, on reflection, I don't mean to be disparaging. It was just a wonderful opportunity to go and make pictures move and do line tests. It's I'm just more describing the quality of having a bunch of 17 to sort of 22-year-olds all in a room covered in pimples and paper cuts, scribbling away and trying to learn how to socialize together. That's what I mean by a pit. Yeah,
that's fair enough. This same chapter's got that incredible illustration of Rid Cully that you were talking about. So good.
Yes. There's so much good stuff in this section because there's the Joseph Wright references from the Science of Discworld.
Oh, yeah, those are so good.
That's one of my faves. I've been a bit of a itinerant creative in all sorts, and I got into theatre, and I actually came to Melbourne to study acting. So I think I'm a sucker for just some dramatic lighting. I love a spotlight.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rid Cully and the faculty and Ponder Stibbons gathered around Round World is gorgeous. But then, we have that picture of Rid Cully, and he sort of goes into detail about how he doesn't have much time for sort of books and spells. He's sort of outdoorsy. He's kind of into hunting and fishing. So he's got the fishing lures and then the sort of handy utilitarian drawers, and even down to that his robes are sort of a durable brown leather, like an outdoorsman, and then the flask on top that unscrews. And then you throw in his actual demeanor. I think he describes him as brimming with machismo and testosterone. He's so possibly toxically male, but he's so outdoorsy and macho that and I'm that's the face you've captured as well.
I often think of him now as having a similar kind of energy to Ron Swanson from Parks and Recreation, this sort of quite avuncular and yet slightly threateningly masculine man.
Yeah.
Oh, but my God, there's so many good things in this chapter. I'm skipping forward a bit now because I'm mindful that we're going to get stuck in talking about every single one. But there's an amazing spread. I won't go into it in too much detail. There's an amazing spread on page 64 and 65 of just other wizards, which includes an incredible illustration of Esk. In fact, 2 of them. One when she's younger, sort of at the start of the book, and one somewhere around the end of Equal Rights. And also some other fantastic wizardly illustrations. I love the one of Brian, who's a minor wizard character from one of the Tiffany books. Really great. They're all great. All of these wizards are great.
Drum Billet looking very classic, right corner pocket, sort of Gandalf the Greyish, Merlin wizard.
A wizard's wizard, I think he describes him as.
And then you've got Eric. It's quite...
Oh, yeah.
I actually get a little intimidated by that picture of Eric. He says that very occasionally I feel fully pleased, and that this painting of Eric is one of those occasions where he feels like he's nailed it. And he's like, well, he's definitely nailed something, because there's something really unsettling about Eric. And plus, when you sort of know Eric's context, and then in the modern age we live in, sometimes Erics can be quite scary, in their disaffection and this sort of underlighting and red is, I'm like, oh, that sort of gives me the heebie-jeebies, that Eric.
Yeah, the lighting on that Eric is incredible. His
Yeah.
coin, much older than I imagined coin.
Yeah.
He looks like a young teenager or maybe even like a young adult, but he's in the book, he's like 10 or something or younger.
And quite seriffic or cherubic. Maybe more seriffic than cherubic. Yeah, he kind of looks like he could do kids' catalogue modelling kind of thing. He looks kind of disaffected and it's
for sure.
2 of the early books. It was the Tony Robinson audio tapes was how I encountered them. So Sorcery was one of the ones that I listened to. And I think the voice he used for Coin, he did quite a good job of evoking this quite young, quite fragile little boy.
I can imagine. Yeah. Look, we go for the wizards into the witches. And there's some great illustrations of Granny Weatherwax. I feel like some people might be disappointed that she only gets sort of one double-page spread, but I am absolutely delighted at how many images there are of Nanny Ogg in this book, even if, most of them are young Nanny getting it on with various artists.
With Leonard of Quirm.
And I was so pleased. I was like, oh, I've only ever seen, and again, I don't know how many of these are new. Like there's some, like the Hireling Genius, which is like young Leonard of Quirm and young Nanny Ogg in the woods on the grass together, which is a parody of a painting called The Hireling Shepherd. This is one I'd never seen that before. I don't know if it's new. And again, I kind of wish the book was more explicit about that, like where things came from, like what they were done for. There's little mentions here and there, but I guess it's not important context for most people. But, as a big Pratchett nerd, I want to know.
Yeah.
I don't know. What did you draw this for? Was it for a calendar? Was it for something else? I'm assuming a calendar because of the ratio. It's like sort of a wide landscape kind of image. But those are gorgeous.
Granny Weatherwax, I think I was telling you the other day, is in a contender for like my favorite character in Discworld.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I really like Kidby's creation of her. And I love that the opening of this chapter with the 3 of them, Magrat and Nanny Ogg. And I love Nanny Ogg's the hedgehog design on that pipe. Have you had a little hedgehog
on
pipe?
The pipe that she's smoking is a little hedgehog.
It's so cute, and it's like I can almost run my thumb over the little quills that have carved into the wood of the what do they call it? The bell of the cup of the pipe.
It's got a name like that. I don't know. Listen, if you know, please. The hashtag for this episode is Pratchett88. I think it's called like the bulb or something. I think or the bowl. I don't know. I have friends who smoke pipes. I'm not a smoker, so I don't know. But if you know. But yeah, that is a great illustration. It's the one that got turned into a stamp, that picture of the 3 of them. And I like in all these pictures of Nanny Ogg, he manages to sneak in a hedgehog, at least one somewhere. And then also in most of them, all these ones of young Nanny Ogg particularly, somewhere in the background, there's a very stern and disapproving looking Granny Weatherwax, which is also so good.
Well, they're such a fire and ice, aren't they? And they're like, he sort of captures that really well. Like she's so life embracing and body embracing and yeah. I will say that the Mona Lisa one. The
Mona Ogg, yeah.
Yeah, the Mona Ogg. That smile is very, very toothy and very like slightly unnerving. I think
a different way to the original.
If I had I have the utmost respect for Kidby. If I had one thing, I think I don't know if it's his years as a dental technician, but his fondness for like a full perfect set of teeth, just unsettlingly perfect appearing. It's definitely not that subtle smile of the Mona Lisa. It's this beaming grin, but maybe that's appropriate to Nanny Ogg. That's maybe
I think so.
How she would be.
She would not be enigmatic in that situation. But you were talking about his years as a dental technician, which is something that he talks about in the book. And it reminds me that there's one of them in here, but there's a few times he's drawn the rats of the clan from The Amazing Maurice and his educated rodents. He always draws one of them who's got some false teeth. And stuck him in his mouth. So there's this like rat with like appropriately sized, anatomically correct human teeth, which is just like, this is not all right. This is horrifying.
It
but
joins
in a very funny way.
The list of unsettling smiles in this book.
Yeah. The Mona Ogg is one that he says he revisited, and I think I have seen. I don't have the book, so he did the Pratchett Portfolio, which is a really slim book of only a small number of pages, relatively. But then he did another one later on, which is called The Art of Discworld or something similar, and it's got a lot more illustrations, and the cover of that was his earlier version of the Mona Og, not the one that's in this book. And then he's also got that other version of Old Nanny Og.
Oh, I love that.
That's great.
Yeah, her with Grebo.
I feel like we got to mention young Granny as well, because there's the young Esme Weatherwax on page 60.
Yeah.
Like not super young, like 30s or 40s, so not like a young adult kind of young, but much younger than, the Granny that we see in the novels, but still, like there's a really, like you can see it. It's definitely her. Like it's really good. It's
that sort of the steeliness and the archness, the guardedness is. That's another example actually of. He talks on this page about he always draws her with a high collar and just these little indications of how they dress, when they get up in the morning is an indication of character. And I kind of like, when I looked back at this, I noticed that he's drawn the umber sketch down in the bottom left corner there of the spread. It is a high collar, but it's got a split at the throat. And that sort of evokes the history with Ridcully as well, teetering on the brink of whether she's going to commit to relationships or whether she's dedicated to the craft of witching. And I kind of like that. Such a subtle thing. But then, the color prints that on the same page, it's like full black, almost like a nun's habit, right up almost to the chin.
Yeah. And all of his witches are great. It's interesting that he talks about feeling that he needed to learn. A couple of places where he says, he sort of felt he had to learn how to draw women's faces better, which I thought was interesting because he doesn't say the same thing about men's faces, although I think you see a very similar evolution in the way he draws all people, but he feels like it was different for him drawing women to drawing men. So I thought that was interesting that he observed that. But that's another instance with all of those witches on the spread there where he's brought in sort of revised versions and he's based them on different people. Like he's turned Miss Tick into a version of Indira Varma who reads the novels, which I thought was great, and it's not, she doesn't look exactly like her, but there's very definite echo of her face in Miss Tick.
Oh, they're fantastic. They're all fantastic portraitures and like individuals. I'm sort of thinking about how he was trained on observation, and we didn't mention the beautiful pictures of his boots that he's done as a boy. There's beautiful renditions of his boots. And what I found interesting is he said that he was like drawing his own face in the mirror. He didn't include those, but I'm sort of thinking if he's learnt drawing his face and you're using yourself as a model, you maybe he's a bit more patterned on a slightly more masculine presentment. And, so it takes a while to sort of gain the familiarity because, what could be more familiar than your own face in a mirror? He says himself that he uses himself as the basis for a lot of the characters, or at least I would sort of encounter this as an animator. Sometimes you'd have a mirror to try and get expressions. So even if you've modeled the character on something else, and I don't know that this is true for Kidby at all, but like if you've modeled the character on something else, but then you're sort of, hang on, how does a grimace? How do I make that face grimace? And you're pulling a grimace in the mirror and you sort of, so bit by bit, you're sort of just patterning your face into things. You're folding it into the mix.
Yeah. Now, I'm mindful that, we don't want to try and mention everything in the book, but obviously there's a section on the watch. And I think that's one where the evolution of the characters is very, very noticeable. Like they start out as much closer to that caricature sort of end of the Kidby continuum, if I can call it that.
The Kirby Kidby continuum.
Yeah, but as he keeps drawing them, they become more real. And I think you see that with Vimes, who also, starts out looking more like Clint Eastwood as Dirty Harry, but later on, as he describes, looks like a cross between Clint Eastwood and Pete Postlethwaite, which is what Pratchett said he always imagined he looked like. But
I had a query about that because I see one very Postlethwaite image, which is a fun thing to say. One very Postlethwaite image, but the others I still see quite a lot of Eastwood. Like that's one thing where on the images that I had there, I couldn't quite make the connection to what he was saying.
Yeah, well, this is again, I think, where I wish they were captioned more explicitly as where they're from and when they were drawn, because I think a lot of the ones in here, like I've seen a lot, not all of them, but I've seen a lot of these images of Vimes before. And so I know that some of them are older, and I think it's most of them do look more like Eastwood, and it's only the much more recent ones that look more Postlethwaite-y, I think.
I do see that, you've got some early, some very sharp noses, which maybe are a bit more Eastwood-esque. And then the sort of bold of the nose, the sort of the tip of the nose starts to get a bit more, ever so slightly, sort of. And that does seem appropriate. It's interesting because that does seem appropriate. That does seem like a good change because there is grit to Vimes, but there is a sort of a humanity to him and a softness to him as well. There is a feeling man in there. Like he's not just a hard. He's not Dirty Harry. He's absolutely it's funny because in his behavior, he's very much not like Eastwood is in that.
Yeah, that's true. Although he does the lines, from the film, and I think that's part of the challenge of this is that a lot of the characters become associated with other characters because they're involved in a parody, but the character is not that similar. Like you say, Vimes is not Dirty Harry, but Vimes does the Dirty Harry parody in the books. I think that's a tricky thing to balance too. And he kind of alludes to that when he's talking about the scene where Vimes has got the dragon, like it's a shotgun or something, which is from the scene in the book, which parodies the whole Magnum speech from whichever Dirty Harry film that is. But in the book, as he points out, he's actually wearing Sybil's nightie and some slippers. And you're like, yeah, but I'm not going to draw that because out of context, you don't understand why that's happening. In the book, it makes perfect sense. But as a drawing, if that's all you see, you're like, what's going on here?
Just a question with that, though. Like, who's buying a Discworld calendar that doesn't...
That's a very good question. I did think of that, actually.
Yeah, I would have thought that would be permissible, the absurdism.
Yeah.
And it is the kind of absurdism that I would think that if you don't know Terry Pratchett and his work, you go, what's this? Dragons, but a man in a nightshirt and slippers. Like, it's that sort of thing that draws you in. But that's just my pondering of why. He certainly looks cool in his armor.
I agree with you. It's people don't, I mean, it's also about the memory, right? Like the memory cheats. I think if you asked the average person who's read, and we've kind of blown the gaff now, so listener, you can't do this, but if you want to test this out for us, if you go and ask another person who reads Pratchett, who hasn't listened to this episode yet, what's Vimes wearing when he does the Dirty Harry thing with the dragon? I reckon they're going to say he's in uniform. I don't think they're going to remember that detail of the scene, So it's, I think that's also a part of it, is that the way you remember an iconic moment is not necessarily with all of the context and accuracy. So I can understand why he's done it, but I also think it would be a really fun drawing if he was, book accurate.
This isn't the biggest example, but this is one of those examples of when he's differed from the text. Like we said that there's few of those. This is one of the few, but it's not the most profound or dramatic, but it's definitely one of the few. Yeah.
Of course, there's great illustrations of Sybil in here as well, one of which is from the new Ultimate Discworld Companion. Great picture. He loves drawing the dragons, the swamp dragons. And why wouldn't you? They're amazing.
I can imagine that there's sort of lower pressure. I like drawing animals more than portraiture sometimes because it just feels it's easier to get it right. And there's I think the eye accepts greater variation, particularly if it's a swamp dragon. Like you've kind of got carte blanche for all sorts of interesting shapes, and so no one's going to complain if the nostrils are moving to interesting locations.
Yeah. There's some more great images of all of the Watch people. We can't dwell on all of them, but like I say, Colin and Carrot and Angua, those three in particular, are ones that he's made much more realistic. They look very much like real people now, whereas previously they were much more on the caricature end. Angua less so, but Angua has changed quite a lot in other ways.
The Sergeant Colin, I love that. It's one of the realest looking, not just because it looks realistic, but it's one of the most, I feel like I've met him when I look at that thing of Colin. And the Angua, I think, in front of the moon is gorgeous. Like I'm like, I feel, I kind of don't like calling things definitive, because I think it's a sort of a multiversal thing in all our heads as readers, I think it should be able to shift and move, but it's as close to my headcanon of Angua as I can imagine. There's a sort of, that sort of, there's a fragility to her, but the strength and
She looks, I was just thinking that the new image of Angua is amazing, but she looks younger than I always imagine her. But then when I think about it, when they meet, Carrot's like 18 or 17 or something. So if it's going to be at all reasonable, she's got to be quite young. So maybe that makes sense. Yeah.
I quite like the sketch that's with Angler as well.
Mm.
It looks like she's got a slightly broader nose. And just in my mind, I just like with the werewolf component, and sort of the olfactory powers of a canine, it just sort of makes sense that she might have a slightly powerful schnoz. Like I don't know. It just sort of spoke to me. It's like, oh yeah, I can see that as a design choice as well.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Does look a little bigger. I mean, he's also drawn her as a wolf. He talks about how much he loves the swamp dragons, partly because he used to draw dinosaurs and dogs. He's always had dogs. And so he loves that there's sort of this combination of the two. And he also talks about, he has a collection of weird rocks because he had an interest in geology as a kid. And so that's where a lot of the inspiration for his trolls come from. Like, there's a lot of things that feed into his illustrations that when you get that sort of glimpse at where it comes from, you're just like, yes, of course. That makes so much sense.
Yeah. And it gives it a lot of life. I can see his whippet in a lot of the swamp dragons.
Yes.
Those soulful eyes, those sad, soulful eyes.
Yeah. Now, I'm kind of flicking through. I'm skipping past a lot of stuff that I really like. We'll come back, I think, to a couple of our favorites. But, of course, there's more of characters from Ankh-Morpork. There's a whole bunch of images of Death, which are great. I think my favorite one is the one of Death and Mort together, because I love this version of Mort that's in this book, quite different to the ones I've seen before. Some great images of the death of rats. I love that there's a comment in here somewhere that he says, I've had to draw so many dead rats. I'd like to think that I'm really good at it now. Because, the dwarfs eat them and the death of rats is always attending the death of them. And then there's the clan, just lots of rats.
Interestingly, he's based the skull on a rabbit, not a rat, because rat skulls, the sockets for the eyes they don't read as well. Like it's harder to see on a rat skull where the eyes go. And
yeah, right.
It makes me think of the in The Simpsons, where they say that if they want a horse, they take cats together. It's like you've got to sell the illusion, like what works imaginatively for people isn't necessarily the literal source material. You might be better sort of straying a bit to sort of sell the idea.
Yeah, and I mean, look, that's also about most people don't have a knowledge of anatomy, certainly of, animal anatomy. I think everyone knows what a human skull looks like, but not everybody knows what a rat skull looks like. So perfect chance to get away with it. Do something that reads better in the abstract. I also like, he talks in the book a couple of times about the fact that he's a vegetarian, and he particularly says, I've drawn a lot of eyeballs for vegetarian and things eating eyeballs. And I'm like, yeah, that'd be a bit rough. So many other good things. Look, I'm sort of flicking through quite quickly now because I want us to get a bit to the end. And there's just so many good illustrations. Now, I don't want to dwell on this because we haven't done the book yet, so I don't want to get into any spoilers, but I've kind of flicked through to the Tiffany section of the book. And I think I found his discussion about the cover for the Shepherd's Crown really interesting, because I think even if you haven't read the book, you've probably seen the cover image and the number of changes that were requested there. And there's a couple of other cover sections. One of them is Raising Steam and one of them is Snuff, actually. And he talks about the process he went through for drawing it and the requests that he got from Terry and the requests that he got from the publisher. And it just seems like, again, I was reminded that he works in pencil and paint. And I'm like, that makes this torturous, surely. Like, 'cause you can't just digitally erase it, but have a backup so you can go back to the original version if you want to. You've got to start over again, or you've got to rub bits out. Really intense.
I hope it's not spoiler to say that, they talk about removing bees from an image of Tiffany Aching that are sort of near her body. And he says you can just see where I've kind of painted in the bees into her form. And look, if I had Paul Kidby's skill and I'd produced an image half as good as this and a publisher, I guess I'd do what I was told, but I'd be like, no, it's the best drawing I've ever done and you can't make me change it. It's so exhausting amounts of detail and work and precision that he's put in. But yes, I think it would be exhausting and so difficult to change stuff when you're working in paint and pencil like this. Yeah.
I'm in awe of the amount of work that must be. And I don't think most things that I make digitally these days, whether it's audio or whether it's writing. And I do a lot of drafting in pencil for ideas, particularly for game designs, but it just struck me as so much work, but the kind of quality that he gets out of it makes it worth it.
As someone that aspires to illustrate, I think I've said this a couple of times, but one thing that just screams out of Kidby's work is how much work is in it. Because if you've ever tried, if you've ever even progressed a bit in a craft like this, you can see the exhausting amount of detail, the technical precision that he's executing in drawing after drawing. And then when you find out he's doing them in full canvases and boards as oil paintings and acrylics, you're like, that's madness. It's great. There's a section where he talks about Escher. He quotes Escher talking about what drive, because he says he really respects Escher's work ethic. This is MC Escher, who does the backwards, upside down stairs, if people are unfamiliar, the sort of visual illusions.
A lot of tessellations.
Yeah. He has Escher saying in a letter to his son in 1955, talent and all that, for the most part, is nothing but hogwash. Any schoolboy with a little aptitude might very well draw better than I, perhaps. But what he most often lacks is the tough yearning for realization, the teeth-grinding obstinacy and saying, even though I know I'm not capable of it, I'm still going to do it.
Amazing.
It's not an accident that Kidby's included that quote, because if that speaks to him, because it definitely speaks to me looking at his work, the level of dedication to craft and just... He talks about draftsmanship a lot, like, which is, this is the producing of those base drawings. And when I think of Kidby, but I do like really respect this level of detail. Yeah. And just the time that he's poured into getting this good.
Yeah. I think that would have been part of what appealed to Pratchett about him as well, I think. Because he always had this preference. Like, he didn't like making deals with big companies or corporations. He always preferred craftsmen. That's why Bernard Pearson was a mate of his and made all of the models and ran the Discworld Emporium. He wanted that kind of person who is going to get it right. I'm going to pour my time and my energy into making it right. It's not going to be a mass-produced product for as little money and little effort as possible. It's going to be something that is grand, because I think that's how Pratchett felt about his own writing process. Go into the office and he'd write for how many hours. I mean, he could be a bit relaxed about it in later years because he had plenty of money, so he could take a bit of time. But he didn't take a bit of time. He was still pumping out 2 books a year most years until, he started to get ill and that wasn't possible anymore. He's really working hard. And I think he really looked for that in the people that he wanted to collaborate with.
I feel like the characters is often these like mastercrafts people.
Yeah.
I think the beekeeper at Longcrook Castle sort of comes to mind.
Yes.
There's all these characters. You detect a bit of reverence from Terry for those kind of people that they do one thing and they do it sublimely. They do it to the point of art.
Yeah. Well, there's more examples we could come up with, but I do want to talk about the kind of explicit chapter about process where Kidby kind of describes for us his studio and all of the equipment that he uses when making his art. And look, listener, if we've skipped over one of your favorite images, I'm sorry, but you can't see it anyway. You're going to have to go and get a copy of the book to have a look at them. They're really gorgeous. But this is where there's all these photographs of not just the space that he works in, but also his drawer full of pencils, the jar of rocks that he describes basing trolls on, his dog. There's a great picture of his dog with one of his tubes of paint in his mouth, which I was very worried about, but it's very cute.
He's got the non-paint end.
Yes, that's true. He's not eating the paint, to be clear. I love this because I'm fascinated by a creative process, artistic process. But I am not a visual artist, so this was really interesting to me. Like, yes, tell me about your setup. What's your table like? Where do you keep your pencils? What do you have on your walls? And it turns out nothing. He talks about it. He had one of the big pictures framed and he hung it above his desk and it stayed there for half a day and he took it down again. He didn't want it there. He didn't want no distractions.
And I respect that. And I was wondering which way it would be, because it tends to be one or the other, I think, with artists. It's like everything's up on the walls or it's focused. Maybe that's not true. I'm not sure. Like, in my experience, it reminded me of I had a partner a long time ago, not my partner now, but who was doing a drawing course. And the teacher came into her studio to sort of check on her, and she had like the last raft of work blue tacked or pinned to the wall. And this teacher sort of said very off the cuff, like, your old work's holding you back. You should take it down. And she was obviously struck enough with that to sort of relay that to me. And it stuck with me as interesting advice to take or not, because like anything, you should feel free to ignore it. But that idea of art as process, and if you get too fixed, for me, it sort of speaks to like if you get too fixated on art as object or art as result, you lose momentum in the process. And your ambition should be to fill the empty space. So you need the empty space to sort of keep making.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find it really interesting because the kind of process that he's talking about, and I think the kind of thing that fits in with that motivation that you're talking about, is the kind of not mechanical, that's the wrong word, but like the practical process. Which is like, okay, I'm going to assemble my desk. I'm going to have nothing on my walls. I'm going to have my pencils within reach. I'm going to have my paints organized in this way. This is the kind of brush I use, and I've got 6 backup ones because I go through them really quickly. Like that kind of how I make it work stuff. And that's really interesting to me because what I teach when I'm teaching creative process is kind of the sort of higher level theory of what's going on in your brain, like, the psychological process above that then translates into whatever practical process works for you. And we talk about both. And, one of the important things that we ask students to do is to try and relate one to the other. When you think about what you actually practically did, what does that mean you were doing at that higher psychological level at that time? And what does that say to you about what your current process is? And do you think that's serving you? Is that a good idea? Like we're trying to get them to reflect on it and learn from it. And I think here he's quite wisely talking about a lot of the practical stuff because that kind of does communicate a bit of that philosophy, like you're saying, but also it's very approachable to a layperson who doesn't know anything about visual art. And hasn't studied creative process or any of that kind of stuff. It's just like, okay, all right, you organize your stuff that way. And I think anyone can relate to that because we all do something where we have to be a bit organized and think about how we're going to do it, even if it's not something that we would consider important or artistic or creative. We do something that's like that.
He strikes me a bit like a sort of a mechanic talking about tools and car parts. Like there's this sort of like that he understands how the machine fits together for him. And, so he's like, well, I get this gasket and align it with this sprocket. And it makes sense to me, having seen his work and the precision in his work, that it seems he's quite I don't want to make assumptions about what goes on in Paul Kidby's brain, but very details oriented, which I think helps him produce very detailed work. Very specific about his tools in like, for instance, in ways I'm not. I notice he talks about the range of pencils he has. And one of the first things, almost any book on using pencils, like it tends to be a bit of a gravity towards 2B as the sort of your drawing pencil of choice, because it's kind of a good balance of softness and hardness, because pencils have clay and graphite in them, and 2B is kind of very malleable. And but he says, it's too messy and I smudge it and my work gets too cloudy, because he's working with H's and stuff. He's working with really hard pencils that he's also sharpened to a javelin-like point.
Yeah, those pictures at the front, it's frightening.
And I'm like, it makes sense, Look, approaching this, I'm like, say it isn't so, Paul. Please tell me that there's just this really easy way to get these amazing results that you get. And he's like, it's hard work. It's hard work and precise tools, precisely applied. Like he even talks about the tooth of the paper, the texture of paper that lets him do detailed work, and I just this sort of really speaks to the level he's operating at, is the actual texture of the paper could interfere with the level of detail he's doing as he moves one of those ultra fine points around Tiffany Aiking's eyelash. Like if he hits a little like crevice in the texture of the paper, it's going to disrupt what he's doing, because that's how I think it really speaks to how precisely he's working.
Yeah.
The other thing I found amazing about this is he, apart from the scale he's working on, he would do, he says he does his underdrawing. I love that he says, I use my eraser as much as my pencil. So he's sort of drawing and erasing back, and he uses erasers, he says, to create highlights, which, I do that digitally.
Yeah.
I'm not brave to do it. Like there's a certain point where with my level of skill, I'm going to destroy a drawing doing that. But he's working back and forth with pencil and eraser, it seems. And he says something about like, it's about getting it wrong until you get it right.
Yeah. He's iterating.
And then when he's got it right, he says he works to a finished drawing, which is like this, I think you can see him painting the massif maybe. He's doing the sort of umber drawing on page 239. And he used to, before he had access to an accurate digital scanner, then paint onto that drawing so that his draft sketch was gone. And it wasn't until later in his process that he was producing scans of that and printing them onto board or card to then paint on, so he still kept a reference drawing. And that just gives me palpitations. The idea of doing something that massive and that detailed and then putting paint on it is...
Yeah.
But he knows what he's doing.
He does, and it was interesting because that part of his process, like where he's rubbing things out and doing it again, I feel like that's a bit how I write. It's sort of part of my writing process, but it's also how I draw. And I don't draw very often and I don't draw very well. But when I am drawing something, that's how I do it. And I think I'm at the opposite end of the scale from him, where he can do it because he's such a consummate professional. He's got so much experience that he looks at it and something that you or I would weep to have drawn. He's like, I could do better than this. And he just rubs it out and he goes. And I'm sort of at the opposite end where I'm like, well, I probably can't do worse than what I just did. So I'll try it again. Is sort of where I go. And then I draw it again until I'm kind of vaguely happy with it. Yeah, but what a great chapter. And look, lots of stuff that we don't have time to go into, like when he's talking about painting on actual bits of wood that he got out of his dad's shed when he needed big bits of stuff to paint on because he couldn't afford proper canvas, but properly primed canvas is such a nice thing to paint on, and now I use it, and just lots of really great.
I think his mixing palette was a bit of MDF from the shed.
Yeah.
And it's the one he's had. I want to see that. I don't know if he mentions
no, that's
it.
right. There's no picture of it, is it? It's just, he just describes it.
And I'm like, I want to see this career-long piece of wood that's been covered in paint. I think that's such a shame to not show it.
What a great artifact that would be.
Yeah, and often those sort of things become a kind of a work of art in themselves. They become quite beautiful objects.
Yeah. Well, there's one last chapter to talk about before we get into some questions, Perchance to Dream. And this is where, for this book, Paul was invited by the estate to do some sketches of what might a cover of this book that we know Pratchett had an idea for that he didn't write look like. And the first place that we heard about these is in a little afterword at the back of The Shepherd's Crown. And we've talked briefly about this on the podcast before because it's not a spoiler for The Shepherd's Crown, but there's this little addendum in there where Rob Wilkins kind of reveals some very scant details about half a dozen ideas that Pratchett had for books that we will never see because they've been destroyed. As he requested, as we've talked about many times on the podcast, he requested his hard drives of unfinished work be destroyed by a steamroller, which is such a Pratchett thing to ask for, and they did it. But here they've gone, let's just imagine. We're not going to do it, but let's just imagine. And I think that's a nice way of saying we're not going to do this. But we're sad that we're never going to see them as well. So this is as far as we're willing to go, but we'll give it a shot. And so there's some just pencil drawings. He doesn't go any further than that, but they are quite wonderful pencil drawings.
And appropriate to the idea of ideas as sketches that are yet to be realised. It would sort of feel gauche if he'd done an oil painting of one of these.
I think so. But I also like that there's actually more of them than I remembered. Like, I think there's I think there's like 10 or maybe even a dozen of them. No, I think there's just 10. There's 10. Again, some of these are like one sentence is all we ever got, or one phrase. And then the other tantalizing thing is the afterword by Rob Wilkins, who says that, he feels like this is maybe the start of something that Pratchett wanted to do but didn't get a chance to do, which is like a definitive encyclopedia of the Discworld, like a multi-volume equivalent of the Discworld Companion. I don't know where they're at in that project. It's been a while since we had any announcements of new Discworld stuff, so hard to say. There's some graphic novels coming. There's the new role-playing game, which is just coming out now, but I don't know if there's any plans for any other books. But look, before we get into any questions, Brendan, have we missed any of your favourite things that you'd really like to point out before we answer some listener questions?
I talked about the Night Watch cover, which I adored. I think it's worth mentioning that the Knack McFeagles, that was the big contribution that, he said that they originally painted by Kirby with blue hats, much like you and I have on. The listener can't see right now. But he added their sort of woad-covered skin, their blue skin, and that's become just kind of one of those instances where that, to hear him tell it, he got sort of folded into their fiction. And those are striking covers. Like, as I said, that was the point where me and Terry Pratchett were spending less time together, but I'd see these like blue guys with red hair, like the Wintersmith cover staring at me. It's like, it's an amazing cover.
Yeah.
The Raising Steam cover.
Oh, yeah. That's one of the ones where he goes through the process of making a cover in a bit more detail, and it's quite near the end of the book.
Yeah, and that sort of helps me. I was just talking to my partner. I'm like, I love texture in a drawing. Like when someone has Kidby's level of skill and they're putting the texture in. I love that green, black iron of the steam train. And if you look closely along there's a sort of a highlight running along the cylinder of the engine. And he's put little nicks and bumps and dents in there to give it texture. And if you follow the smoke of the smokestack leads into the shine on the smokestack goes down to the engine that then points right into Moist's eyes. And he's got he's put in a kind of a fire underlight to continue that highlight into Lipwig's form. And then you get the goblin with its like ragged cloak, which is sort of, I think a lot of images I like and things I like to try and reproduce are sort of, there's motifs in them, like visual motifs that they echo. And so you've got the echo of the light, but then you've got this cloak that echoes the cliffs that are behind the train. There's these ragged cliffs that are kind of done in a way that I suspect is intended to mirror his cloak, or at least to sort of unite those bits of the drawing. And of course, it's sort of framed by steam and the moon. It's just the flow of that drawing is so great.
Yeah, I really enjoy that this is in the book because I weirdly have the American edition of Raising Steam, which has a completely different cover. And I don't know why. The American covers are a whole other question. Like, that's a whole, we probably have to do a whole bonus episode about that at some point. Just talk about what happens with these covers because they're so different. They've been through so many different iterations, and the Penguin editions are the same now, the new ones on both sides of the ocean. But yeah, this image of the train is so great. And the fact that the versions that he drew of it, very different. Like the initial one, completely different steam train. And then the second one, he's got a dwarf. And Pratchett's like, no, it should be a goblin. And then, can you add some flying axes overhead, please? It's like, whoa. Like, I've asked for changes when I've worked with an artist before, but it was always much simpler stuff than this. And I feel like I would hesitate. If someone showed me that first image, I'd be like, yep, you do what you want, man. That's amazing.
We collaborated and I did some illustrating for you recently. And if I'd drawn something like this, I don't know how open to notes I would have been.
Yeah, no, exactly. I would have been like, that's perfect. Don't change anything. I'll change what I wrote.
But isn't it great that he did, though? And isn't it great that they had that professional relationship?
Yeah.
And Terry obviously has the confidence of his craftsmanship behind him. And as you say, he expects craftsmanship from someone else. And I think it maybe takes more than a little dose of obsession, but I think the result is great. It is better. It's a better end result.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, let's get to our listener questions. They're entirely from our subscribers on Discord this month. And that's partly because, and listener, I just want to say thank you for your patience. We've had a couple of months where it's been difficult to make the show. So we've been absent for a little while. Which is why we decided to record, even though Liz couldn't make this recording. We didn't want to skip another month. But we did get some great questions from our subscribers. So let's ask those. Molokov had a few. The first one was, what is your favorite piece of parody artwork in the book? And how many of the originals were you aware of prior to this? So how many of those original artworks that the parodies are based on were you aware of? And what's your favorite one?
I like the Night Watch. Parody doesn't seem quite the word, or the homage seems more the word.
It's like some of them are parodies, but not all of them. Yeah.
I love that book. It's the first book with Kidby art I owned. You take one look at it and you're like, I want to go to there. I want to be in that world. I want to see in the shadows of it. Clearly something's happening. And I like it all the more from, I know I've talked about it a bit actually in his podcast, but knowing that he put Kirby's face in Rembrandt's place, because Rembrandt is in the original The Militia picture. He sort of self-inserted, and then the Kidby put Kirby's face in there as the baton was being passed. I thought it was a great, once again, homage. And I loved that book. So it's just a combination of things where maybe it's an affectionate association with the source material as well.
Yeah. Did you know many of the original artworks that were in this book, or were there some that were like new to you?
There's definitely some that were new to me, but I think that the listener was saying that they've got about half, and I think, yeah, somewhere around that percentage is true for me. I was reflecting on where I'd seen some of these, and I realized my father studied art history. That was his major. And our house, luckily for me, is just full of giant hardcover books of like Escher and Goya and things like this. So actually, like as a little kid, I was sort of surrounded by books because when you're a little kid and you're looking for books to read, and there's just all these like old masters because there's not a lot of words, you can't read. So yeah. So I realized, actually, I think I've absorbed a lot of these through my dad's book collection. But what about you? Did there sort of any escape you?
Oh, yeah. I feel like, and I don't know if I'm flattering myself here, but I feel like I did recognize more than half of them. But the thing is that some of them I recognized because I'd already looked at Kidby's paintings and gone, this is based on something. I'm sure I've seen it somewhere, or it feels like something else, and I've gone and looked it up. But there were some really obscure ones in here that I really liked. Well, not really obscure, but certainly beyond my knowledge. But a couple of them, the way he describes them, like this is painting that was hanging in this one pub.
Yeah. And there's a werewolf in the background.
Yeah. Like stuff like that. Amazing. But there are quite a lot of them that I did recognize. I think I had a couple of favorites. I think one of my favorites is the fact that the image of the librarian playing the organ, which I think I've seen before, or a version of it. I don't know if this is a new version for this book, but is based on that famous image of Terry Jones nude playing an organ or a piano. That's great. I don't know. I've seen that picture of Terry Jones many times. I did not realize that's what that picture was based on, but it makes perfect sense. So I think that's one of my favorites.
I laughed out loud when I saw that and also made the connection then that I hadn't before. And actually another weird one that I hadn't connected was the Star Wars poster. Going Postal.
Yeah. That one I realized, yeah. But that's a great one.
I did not spot it at the time, and it's so obvious when you see them side by side.
And he's got that very similar image of Kanina and Rincewind earlier in the book that he talks about being based on like a Frank Frazetta piece, which is very much what the Star Wars one is evoking. I can't remember who the artist is who did that Star Wars poster. But yeah, just great stuff. I really like Troll with a skull earring. Mm-hmm. I think that's gold. I love that. Obviously, I'm familiar with the very famous picture. But then there's the the ones that I don't know are really great, like Lady with the Swamp Dragon, which is based on Lady with an Ermine. Stuff like that. Just, there's so many. But I feel like I knew more than half. I would say not more than 2/3. Like there was at least a third of these original source images that he's sort of referencing or parodying that I had no idea of. Yeah. I think those are my couple of favorites.
I find it hard to put a number on because I'm probably hovering around a similar place, but if there's references that I'm not spotting, because I think even beyond the ones that he's called out, I think there's so layered.
Yeah, and I mean, there's some famous ones, and then there's ones that, you know, maybe you've seen in an art book, but you wouldn't recognize, like the Bilious one that you talked about, which is based on the Caravaggio. I've not seen that Caravaggio before, but I'm sort of familiar with other pieces of his art, so it seems very familiar. And it's of a style that you've sort of seen, so it's like I kind of get where this is coming from, even if I don't know the specific artwork. But yeah, there were a lot of the specific artworks that I didn't know, for sure.
In most cases, I'd see it, I'd be like, I'd know the artist, not the painting, and then me and my phone would be like, yeah, Caravaggio, boy with grapes, yeah. And you'd go looking for what the specific image was. Like one, actually, the experiment on the bird in a jar, the Joseph Wright.
Yeah. Oh, the Science of Discworld ones I love so much. They're so good.
It's so strange because I've been building a D&D scene, situation, and adventure that was based off that painting.
Oh, wow.
So it's sort of strange how these things come around. And one last strange thing was he did the death sort of print for the Strawberry Thief, which is the William Morris print of like a bird stealing strawberries against a leafy background. I knew of William Morris. I didn't know of this print. But just strangely, as I was getting ready to sit down and record with you, I just went past my partner's diary sitting on the table, and it's got the Strawberry Thief on it. It's just a weird bit of serendipity.
Which he mentions is one of the things that they make out of it. I think he says, like, now you get notebooks and stuff with it on it or something.
Yeah.
He said, if it's not notebooks, it's something similar. That's great. Wow. That's one I hadn't seen. I'd never seen that before. So that was definitely one in my, I don't know what that is.
Yeah, no, I wasn't familiar with the piece, no.
The other one that I really love, and it's not strictly a parody, but it's kind of, it sort of is, but it's not parodying a specific image, more a situation. I love his drawing from Moving Pictures of the giant ginger with the librarian in her hand. And that's kind of a climactic scene of a novel you haven't read. So I'm sorry that this is kind of a spoiler, but it's obviously it's that inversion of King Kong where you've got a giant woman climbing up a building holding an ape in her hand. And it's a great image, and he's done it in black and white to really sort of evoke the black and white cinema. Just great stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I did sort of see that and went, oh man, I should have read that. I should have read that years ago. That's on me now. But it is an amazing image. Yeah.
Molokov had a couple of other questions. The next one was there any tidbit about Paul Kidby's process that you found incredibly fascinating? And we've already kind of talked about this, but is there a specific little bit that you're like, that is amazing? I would never have thought of that.
I've largely talked about the specific bits that really drew me in and sort of really resonated with me with how he was making stuff. I think it's not really his process, but his hustle, which we also talked about, in trying to connect with Terry. I found that really interesting, that sort of drive. I think the main thing, and we have talked about it, is just the idea of working up in analog, from a drawing and then putting paint on it. I actually and I have to admit that looking at his work, I didn't immediately know how it was achieved. If you told me it was digital painting from an accomplished digital painter, I might have believed that as well. I could have believed anything because they're so polished as works. And finding out that he's doing, I think, the first time you see that great Atuan painting, and you're like, oh, he's doing them at that scale. I think that was fascinating to me to sort of to know that he's essentially got an easel out and he's making works at that scale. It was pretty fascinating.
Yeah. I was amazed because, I didn't know what his process was like at all. I think some part of me assumed that some things must have been done digitally, even though I was sure he did work in paint because I think I'd seen him talk about it or it's been mentioned somewhere. But even the blue glow that he does around characters like Death and Susan and Mort is done in paint, and he does masking to achieve that with a very specific, very bright blue, glowy paint color. And then there's also a bit where he's talking about working with really kind of quite poisonous cadmium red or something.
Cadmium,
I can't remember what and I was like, this is amazing. This is dangerous. You're going to have a hazard suit on. But just using actual physical masking with tape on or whatever, and it'll be masking tape. That's what it's for. But still, he's and pulling it off and it's worked. And I'm like, oh my God, what do you mean it's worked? Has it ever not worked? I'm stressed just thinking about it. Yeah, I thought that was great.
I think I'll be revisiting that chapter, I think, to sort of take it apart bit by bit and, sort of try things as I can, some of them I won't be but
Yeah. Molokov also asked us, out of the hints at books Terry never got to write, which is your favorite concept and which do you desperately want to have read?
I know my two. Upschool sounds great to me. I would love a death novel with Susan as the headmistress of Quirm College for young ladies. I can see it. And as he says, you put death in a mortarboard and it just makes sense. Yes, it does. It makes a lot of sense. And possibly because of the D&D nerd in me, the dungeon delving nerd, Running Water sounds really interesting to me. Even though I haven't read a lot of the Moist books, this sort of image of him with a goblin and a gnoll, the sort of a trash troll.
Yeah.
In the catacombs. And you would know better than me. My recollection is that in Men-at-Arms, someone's using the tunnels under Ankh-Morpork a lot to sort of get around. And ever since that, he often sort of says that Ankh-Morpork is built on top of Ankh-Morpork. And I'd always wanted the subterranean Ankh-Morpork story is a story I really want to read.
Yeah, I think that would be cool. Those are not at all the two that I picked. There's no overlap, which is great. I found it very hard to narrow it down to just two. I think so. I do have three, but that's because I couldn't split which one I really want to.
If we're having three, can I throw the redoubtable Maurice in there as well, just as a third? Yeah.
Oh my god, now I've got four because like Maurice is on my list too. But Maurice, I love the Amazing Maurice. It's absolutely one of my all-time favorite Pratchett books. I would have loved to have seen a sequel, and we kind of are getting a sequel because they made the animated film, and they are making a sequel to the animated film. But the animated film sequel has got nothing to do with the vague sequel idea that Pratchett had. But I think it would have been great to see him as a ship's cat. Would have been a lot of fun. That's the one that I would have really wanted to see, I think. Split with Scouting for Trolls, because more trolls. I just wanted more, like we got a bit of the in Thud, which I think is after you stop reading. It's a great book. It's one of the ones that we kind of only really just get into sort of troll stuff. And I would love to have seen one that was a bit more about them, but also putting them into a weird context where they're also Boy Scouts, but not. So... And it would have been interesting for him to be delving into the Boy Scouts, knowing the origins of Boy Scouts in our world, or some of the sort of more unsavory elements of that history, and whether he would have brought any of that in and done anything with it, or whether he would have gone in a different direction. I think that would have been really interesting. Those ones I really would have wanted to see. I really like the idea of Cab's Well. Where there's just some dude who's down the bottom of a well. It's his job to grant the wishes that people make when they throw coins on him. I really love that.
I'm so intrigued by that. Is he like some sort of small god, or is he just a guy that then has to run around town trying to?
You know, I kind of hope that it's not a Discworld book. Like,
right.
like it's just. I mean, I think it was. I don't actually remember that one. I don't think I've heard of that one before. But I like it a lot. But I think the other one that I really like, the idea of, I don't know whether, this one's not so much I would have definitely wanted to read the book, but I like the idea of it, is the Turtle Stops, which is the kind of fantastic voyage. Something's gone wrong with Greater Chew and he's going to die. So they, wizards assemble a team and they're going to go inside the turtle to find out what's going on inside him and save him. Or her. We don't know the gender of Greater Chewin, but I thought that was cool. I mean, most of them are like, there's something in this. But I think, one of the reasons why this is as far as we want to go is that we know that the way that Pratchett wrote, they would have turned out very differently to what we think they started out as. None of them would have been very close to these descriptions, I think, by the time he would have finished writing them, which is only good and proper,
Yeah, because as you do something, what it wants to be emerges. Yeah. And if you don't have the author with if there's a reverence, this is where if there was reverence, it in some ways would interfere, because Pratchett would change it. He would know what it wanted to be, and he would let it become what it wanted to be. Whereas if we're trying to fulfill a set of instructions to fill a brief, it becomes a very different thing.
Yeah. Look, we have one last question. This is from Sven, also via Discord. Who is your favorite fantasy artist? Now, I'm going to say, other than Paul Kidby, which will save us from having to say Paul Kidby is not our favorite fantasy artist, because he might be, but you'll never know, because we're only going to answer the question. Other than Paul Kidby, who is your favorite fantasy artist? Do you have any favorites?
I have a lot, and I'm kind of like a teenager in a goofy high school drama in that I'm getting crushes all the time on different artists, and often it's dependent on kind of what I'm trying to learn about art and my own process. I think a big one, and it's probably true for a lot of people, so it's not necessarily like Hayao Miyazaki is the worlds that he creates. If I'm going to call him a fantasy artist and then call the worlds he creates fantasy, I really love the fantasy that he creates and gives vision to.
Yeah.
I think Paul Kidby mentions Alan Lee, like how he was like aspiring to sort of do the worlds of Tolkien. And Alan Lee is also like, I grew up with the calendars of Alan Lee imagery appearing. I think I particularly love his goblins and orcs. I can see references of it in what Kidby does. And then there's like, more contemporary people like in the RPG space that I think are doing really cool stuff at the moment. I think Amanda Lee Frank is doing some really cool visual sort of punk work and working analog. She's not like she does digital stuff, but I think they're doing a lot of sort of inking and that sort of stuff. Yeah. And in actually like trying to like look for some of the references here, I stumbled across Arthur Rackham, who you probably know his work, but he's a sort of a 19th century illustrator of sort of like kids' fairy tales and, with amazing ink work. So he's really great too. But yeah, there's a really long list, and I'm sure it'll change again as I get new crushes as I go forward.
Yeah. I found this a difficult question to answer because, as a non-visual art person, I was like, well, I don't pay enough attention to who the artists are. But I was thinking about this, and I do have some favorites. I'm a big fan of Tony DiTerlizzi, who did a lot of illustrations he did some illustrations for like Labyrinth, along with Brian Froud. I think, did he do Labyrinth? Maybe I'm misremembering that, but I also love Brian Froud's work. And they both have this sort of similar kind of slightly messy, scribbly thing going on. But Tony DiTerlizzi famously illustrated the Planescape books for Dungeons and Dragons, which is this sort of weird interdimensional thing, and also did a lot of art for Changeling, which was a White Wolf role-playing game all about sort of modern day various different kinds of the Fae, but they're kind of trapped in human bodies. And he did a lot of the amazing fantasy art for that book. And it's so distinctive a style. I've always remembered that. So that's one. And Brian Froud, who did, the Pressed Fairy book and did a lot of art for Henson and work on Labyrinth and all that stuff, which I really loved. And I've recently started to dabble a bit more in Magic the Gathering. We talked about this on the board game episode we did recently with Richard Mackenzie, who's a much bigger Magic fan than me. And there's it's such a source of art. Like every card has got an illustration on it, and some of them are phenomenal. And I have not gotten deep enough into it to start looking for artists that I like, but I know there are a few, and some of them do more work in some sets than others. But there's some gorgeous art in that, and some of it is quite incredible. So I'm going to have to look up who some of those artists are.
We should swap lists, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also have recollections of playing a little bit of Magic the Gathering with a kid down the road, and thankfully I never got into it. But
yeah, don't get into it. It's expensive.
Yeah, but the art is amazing and really draws you in.
Yeah, and look, I look at a lot more cards than I buy, to be clear. But that's the nice thing, is you can look at them all online. There's massive databases of all the art. It's incredible.
Kidby mentions Frazetta a few times, and I think I'd have to acknowledge Frazetta's an influence on me. I think Frazetta is a master as well, and I think the content is sometimes, it's kind of like some people might be rubbed the wrong way by some of Kirby's content. I think some of his content sometimes is a bit problematic, but the technique and the execution of what he's doing is amazing. And I particularly like his ink work. He's amazing, obviously, at fully rendered scenes, but his ink work is great.
Yeah, those kind of classic fantasy artists like Brom and what's his name, Vallejo, there's some amazing stuff. Yeah, like they're classics for a reason. Like whoever did the original, Michael Moorcock covers for like the Elric novels, like that kind of stuff is incredible. But I don't know who all those artists are. I do also have this sort of very nostalgic, because I was thinking about cover artists, because Sven also mentioned that the French Discworld books have amazing covers, and they're by an artist named Marc Simonetti, and his work is really great. And I also really like, when it comes to Discworld covers, Marina Vidal, who does these sort of slightly more cartoony but really evocative of the tone, very bright covers for the Catalan editions of the Discworld novels. And my favorites are The Amazing Maurice and the Equal Rights cover that she did. Equal Rights is particularly amazing because I love that it's focused on Esk. So it's just her face. And then you can see on her shoulders, one hand's Granny Weatherwax and the other hand is, what's his name? The wizard. I've forgotten the name of the wizard in that book. But yeah, it's incredible. We could probably think of more fantasy artists if we spent more time. We'll try and list all the names of the ones. We'll get to some notes eventually for this episode, and we'll list those. But that kind of brings us to the end of the episode. Brendan, thank you so much for joining me to discuss this book.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
It's been a real delight. If people want to find out more about your work as a game designer, as an illustrator, as a facilitator of creative workshops, where can they find out more about you?
I've recently moved into a brand new website. It's a little rudimentary so far, but if you don't mind sort of eating out of pizza boxes on the floor, you can find me at brendanbarnett.com. I'm Brendan with an A-N. I'm not one of those O-N Brendans. And Barnett has two T's. The second one is silent. brendanbarnett.com.
Great. We'll link to that, of course, in our episode notes. If you were going to recommend one thing that you've made that you think Pratchett fans would really dig, what would that be? Assuming that the kind of thing it is appeals to them. You know?
Yes. I see where you're going. I make adventures for people that like to roll dice and pretend. So the most recent roll dice and pretend adventure I made is called Grotto of the Golden Gargoyle. You can find that through my site. There's a link to adventures, or you can find that on my itch page. That's got a fair bit of art in it from me, and it's sort of sprawling maps full of goblins and gargoyles and undead-looking things and, all that sort of lovely nerdy stuff that I enjoy.
Yeah, and with a little bit of a cheeky sense of humor, I think, in it as well. I should disclose that I did do a little bit of work on that. I gave you some feedback and I proofread it for you. I need to proofread it again, as one reviewer pointed out.
That's because you did a fantastic job and I kept going and I kept making mistakes.
But yeah, I agree. And I think if you enjoy Pratchett's goblins, I think you will enjoy Brendan's goblins, even though they are technically the bad guys in this adventure, or at least antagonists. They may not bad guys.
They're there. They're flying around, spoilers, and eating mushrooms and various other things. So, yeah. They're there, and someone actually made the comparison to sort of Labyrinth, Jim Henson-style goblins, and I think I'll take that as high praise because they're fun little weirdos as opposed to horrible, scary little cannibals in the dark. So,
yeah. And look, thank you also to you, listener, for bearing with us because we've had a rough bit of a time. Liz sends her apologies. She would love to have been here for the recording of this episode. And we appreciate you sticking with us. We'll be back next month when we're going to be talking about the Discworld video game. That's the first adventure game released in, I think, 1995. I'll put the year in the episode notes. So we're really looking forward to talking about that. Who knows if we'll get to the other two games that were most famous. We certainly probably won't get to any of the other more obscure video games. But if you've got questions about that, please send them to us over social media. The hashtag is Pratchat89. And to give you a bit of a heads up, to apologize for this episode coming out late, our episode after that for December will be Raising Steam. Yes, the second last Discworld novel. We're doing it before the end of the year. The hashtag for that is Pratchat90. So please get your questions in. And if you'd like to respond to anything we've said in this episode or answer any of the questions that we asked, remember the hashtag for this episode is Pratchat88. If you'd like to help us keep going and make sure that even if there is another time that's rough in the future, we will still be able to keep going and do every single Terry Pratchett book, you can support the podcast. You can find out how to do that at pratchettpodcast.com, where you can also find a list of all the episodes that we've done, links to our back catalogue, information about the books. There's a whole big list of all of Terry Pratchett's books there. If you do become a subscriber, if you want to monetarily support the podcast, there's lots of bonus stuff that you get access to. I did an episode about my Terry Pratchett bookshelf. I'm going to be doing an episode about my other bookshelf, so I might recommend a few new books that are not Terry Pratchett. It's going to be fun. So, yeah, if you want to get onto that and find out some more extra stuff, please do have a look at our website. But until next time, please remember that you don't need to sharpen your pencils that much.
It's dangerous.
You've been listening to Pratchat, the monthly Terry Pratchett Book Club podcast with Pratchetters Ben McKenzie, that's me, and guest Brendan Barnett. Pratchat is produced and edited by me on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung peoples of the Kulin Nation. Our music is by David Ashton. We're on social media as Pratchat or Pratchat Podcast, and you can listen to past episodes and support the production of new ones via pratchatpodcast.com. Join the conversation for this episode using the hashtag Pratchat88.
Pratchat is brought to you by Splendid Chaps Productions. We make entertainment for your ears, like the Doctor Who podcast Splendid Chaps and time travel comedy series Night Terrors. To find out more, visit splendidchaps.com.